This story follows Evelyn Reed, a retired nurse living alone in a storm-battered southern town. One night, a young Latino family seeks shelter during a power outage. Evelyn lets them in, not knowing their presence will rekindle long-buried warmth in her home and uncover painful truths when her estranged daughter returns with bitter intentions. What unfolds is a tale about kindness, regret, and finding family in unexpected places. Evelyn Reed had lived in the same weather-beaten house on Sycamore Street for more than 4 decades. It stood stubbornly at the edge of a small southern town, its siding faded to a pale gray, and its porch sagging a little more each year. Her husband Thomas had died 10 years ago, and her daughter Claire had long since traded front porch swings and pecan trees for high-rises and boardrooms in Manhattan. Evelyn didn't complain. Not to anyone anyway. Who would listen? She kept to herself mostly. Grocery runs on Tuesdays, church on Sundays, cat food for Missy, her old tabby. She still made sweet tea, like Thomas liked it too strong, too sweet, and kept his veteran's cap on the hook by the door. Her home was silent, but it was hers. On the third day of the cold snap, the wind howled like it was mourning something. The snow came heavy and fast, choking roads, killing power lines and silencing the hum of the town. The lights blinked once around 6:15 p.m., then went out for good. Evelyn didn't panic. The gas stove, an old blue enamel relic that had survived 2 hurricanes and 5 mayors, was still working. She lit it with a match pulled on a second sweater and set a kettle to boil. The knock came as she was steeping a bag of chamomile in an old mug with a chipped handle. 3 sharp raps on the front door. Unfamiliar. She hesitated. Who in God's name would be out in this weather? Missy leapt from the windowsill and trotted toward the door, her tail twitching. Evelyn wrapped the shawl tighter around her shoulders and shuffled across the living room. The hallway light, battery-powered, flickered overhead. When she cracked the door open, a gust of snow-laced air slapped her face. 3 figures stood on the porch, a young man, a woman, and a small child wrapped in a bright blue blanket. "Ma'am," the man said. His voice cracked from cold and panic. "Please, we're sorry to bother you, but our power's out and our son, he's burning up. We don't have heat. We saw your light." The woman's eyes were wide and brimming with tears. She clutched the boy tighter to her chest, his head limp on her shoulder. His cheeks were flushed deep red, and his eyelids drooped. "We'll leave as soon as he warms up," she added quickly. "Please, just 10 minutes." Evelyn stared at them. She didn't know their faces. Probably one of the new families that had moved in over on Magnolia Drive. She glanced at the boy, his small body trembling under the layers of fleece. "Come in," she said. The man blinked. "You're sure? Don't make me say it twice. He's a baby, not a soldier. Get him out of that wind." They hurried in. The man stomped snow off his boots. The woman whispered soft thanks. The child gave no response, just a faint whimper. Inside, warmth wrapped around them. The living room glowed dimly from the gas stove's open flame. The floral couch sagged in the middle, and Missy curled back onto her cushion near the fire, like nothing unusual was happening. "I'm Evelyn," she said, shutting the door behind them. "I'm Mateo," the man replied. "This is my wife Elena, and Nico." Elena gently laid Nico on the couch. Evelyn pulled a thick quilt from the nearby armchair and draped it over him. The boy's eyes fluttered open, glazed and confused. "I'll get a washcloth," Evelyn said, already moving toward the bathroom. She came back with a damp rag, pressing it to Nico's forehead. His skin burned beneath it. The boy gave a weak cough. "You fed him." "Not since this morning," Elena said, voice cracking. "He wouldn't keep anything down." "I've got broth. Sit down. Warm yourselves." She moved with the kind of command that only comes from decades in scrubs. In 15 minutes, the room smelled like soup, and Mateo and Elena sat curled on opposite ends of the couch, Nico between them. They didn't talk much, just sipped from mismatched mugs and watched the boy. Evelyn sat in her armchair and watched them quietly. She hadn't seen a child in this house in years. Claire had stopped visiting after Thomas died, claiming the house made her claustrophobic. Evelyn never asked what that meant. Maybe it was just an excuse. But here now was a family huddled together by her stove, sharing space, heat, silence. Missy slunk up onto Mateo's lap, startling him before settling down. He chuckled softly. "She likes you," Evelyn said. "She doesn't like anybody." "That makes two of us," Mateo said, and Elena let out a tired laugh. The boy stirred. His fingers poked from beneath the quilt. Elena fed him a spoonful of broth. He swallowed it without protest. "That's a good sign," Evelyn muttered. Mateo looked at her, his eyes wide with gratitude. "Thank you, Miss Evelyn. We didn't know what to do. If you hadn't—" "I was a nurse," she said simply. "You don't forget how to read a fever." He nodded, but Evelyn didn't meet his eyes. She was already looking past him at the coat rack, where Thomas's old army jacket still hung quiet and solemn. They stayed until the wind softened. By then, Nico was dozing peacefully. Evelyn had warmed up extra blankets and brewed another round of tea. "You can go home if you like," she said, "but you're welcome to stay the night. It's not fit out there for a possum, much less a child." Elena looked at Mateo. He didn't argue. They stayed. That night, Evelyn moved to the guest room and gave up her bed to the couple and their son. She didn't sleep much, but for the first time in years, the silence in the house didn't press down on her. It simply existed. She listened to the wind die down to Missy's purring from the hallway and to the soft murmur of a child breathing in the next room. And she smiled. The next morning, Evelyn stirred awake before sunrise, not because of the cold, but because of the unfamiliar rhythm of breathing in the house. It wasn't just her and Missy anymore. There were others here resting, shifting, exhaling softly behind the bedroom door she'd given up. For a long moment she simply lay there, in the dim light, wrapped in an old quilt, listening. She couldn't remember the last time her home had held the sounds of other people sleeping. Maybe not since Claire was in high school. Back then, the house had been alive, banging doors, music through thin walls, Thomas shouting football scores from the TV. Then slowly, the noise faded. First Thomas, then Claire. Now it was just the echoes. But last night, that emptiness had cracked. And as she sat up and swung her feet to the floor, her joints aching in the usual way, she realized she didn't mind the ache so much this morning. It felt like it had purpose. In the kitchen, she lit the stove and started a small pot of oatmeal. She found a half loaf of bread that hadn't gone too stale, and popped a few slices into her old toaster. By the time the Ramirez family emerged, bleary-eyed but grateful, the house smelled warm and familiar. "Sleep okay?" she asked as Elena settled Nico onto the couch. "Like stones," Mateo said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't realize how tired we were." "You looked it," Evelyn said without judgment, placing a mug of tea in front of him. Nico still flushed, but clearly better perked up at the smell of toast. Missy circled him once before curling back into her chair, giving silent permission for the boy to exist. "Temperature's down a bit," Evelyn said, pressing her hand to his forehead. "Still warm, but not boiling. He needs hydration, some quiet, and no more frozen air." Elena nodded, eyes glassy. "Thank you again. We'll get out of your way as soon as the road's clear." "I hate to impose." "You didn't impose," Evelyn said. "You showed up. There's a difference." Mateo helped clean up after breakfast. He insisted. "My father used to say never take a kindness without giving one back," he explained. Evelyn nodded. Smart man. They worked quietly, efficiently, the way people do when they're trying not to overstay, but secretly don't want to leave. By mid-morning, the worst of the storm had passed, though the streets were still iced over, and the power hadn't returned. Mateo went outside to shovel the steps, while Nico, now wrapped in a sweater of Evelyn's that swallowed him whole, sat beside her and drew on an old notepad, with stubby crayons from some forgotten drawer. Elena folded laundry she didn't have to fold, washed dishes she didn't dirty. "You remind me of my mother," Elena said at one point, her voice soft. "She passed before Nico was born." I used to think no one would ever take care of us the way she did." Evelyn didn't respond right away. She looked down at the boy scribbling lopsided trees and suns. Then she said, "It's easier than people think. Taking care of someone. You just decide they matter." That afternoon, Mateo fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen. It had dripped for 2 years. Evelyn had gotten used to it, the slow rhythm like a ticking clock. Now the silence startled her. He also swept the snow from the back steps unprompted. Elena left a tin of tamales on the counter with a handwritten note before they slipped out that evening, promising to check back the next day. And they did. By the end of the week, they'd visited 3 more times, always bringing something small: soup bread, extra salt for the walkway. Nico was up and bouncing again, dragging Missy around by a yarn tail she tolerated with saintly patience. On Saturday, Evelyn opened the door and found Nico holding a hand-drawn picture of her house, complete with yellow windows and big blue swirls of snow. "Can we come in for a bit?" he asked. "Course you can," she said, stepping aside. Evelyn didn't say it, but something had shifted. The house no longer felt like a bunker against the world. It felt porous, open. When Mateo arrived later with a bag of groceries and a replacement bulb for her porch light, Evelyn scolded him lightly. "I didn't ask for charity," she said. Mateo smiled. "Neither did we, ma'am." They ate dinner together that night. Real dinner. Elena cooked, and the kitchen buzzed with energy. Music played low from Mateo's phone. Nico told a story about a snow monster he saw in the backyard. Evelyn laughed so hard she had to set her glass down. That night, when the house went quiet again, Evelyn didn't feel the weight of silence pressed down on her chest. Instead, she sat in her armchair, looking at the crayon drawing pinned to her fridge. She ran a hand over the stitching of the armrest, the same one Thomas used to grip when he read his mystery novels. She missed him, always would. But tonight the ache didn't feel so sharp. The Ramirez family wasn't her family. But their warmth filled the space her own had left behind. And for the first time in a long time, Evelyn let it. The warmth stayed. It lingered in the way the house no longer echoed so sharply between breaths. It clung to the worn walls wrapped around Evelyn like an old song she hadn't heard in years. Every time she opened the fridge and saw Nico's crayon drawing pinned there, her little house under giant curls of blue snow and yellow glowing windows, something inside her softened. They didn't stop coming. The Ramirez family returned every other day, sometimes just to check in, sometimes to drop off food or firewood, sometimes for no reason at all. One afternoon, Elena knocked on the back door, holding a Tupperware of pozole and a bag of oranges. "I figured you might be low on vitamin C," she said with a grin. Evelyn smiled, letting her in without a word. She didn't mention that oranges had always made her think of Thomas, who used to peel them over the sink and leave the peels curled like question marks. Mateo fixed the creaky screen door that Evelyn had just accepted as part of the house's charm. Nico brought her rocks from the yard that looked like treasure. Evelyn kept them in a mason jar on the windowsill. Missy, once territorial and temperamental, now tolerated Nico's excited hugs, like a queen entertaining a court jester. Evelyn's cough, however, had begun to linger. At first it was just a dry tickle in the mornings, but it crept deeper into her chest by the end of the week. She told herself it was just the cold air, or the dust Mateo had kicked up while fixing the attic vent. She didn't want to make a fuss. Not now. Not with this new rhythm her life had found. But Elena noticed. She always noticed. "Are you feeling okay?" she asked one evening as Evelyn served coffee. "Fine," Evelyn lied. "Just a little winter itch. Comes and goes." Elena frowned, but didn't push. Not yet. The next day, Evelyn stayed in bed longer than usual. Her bones felt heavier, her breath shorter. She made it to the kitchen, lit the stove, and stared at it for a full minute before she remembered what she'd meant to do. Missy meowed, circling her legs. "I'm up, aren't I?" Evelyn muttered. Later that day, Mateo came by to drop off a box of groceries. He noticed the sink full of unwashed dishes, the untouched teacup from the night before, and Evelyn, sitting on the edge of the couch, with a distant look in her eyes. "You sure you're okay?" "Just tired," she said softly. "Getting old's a full-time job." He didn't argue, but the concern in his eyes stayed long after he left. That night she coughed so hard she had to grip the kitchen counter for balance. The next morning, she found Elena already on the porch, with a thermos of soup. "I brought you something warm," she said, studying Evelyn's face. Evelyn smiled weakly. "You always do." They sat together in the living room. Elena asked if Evelyn had someone to call. A family doctor? A relative? Anyone? Evelyn didn't answer right away. She looked toward the fireplace. The photograph of Thomas. The empty space where Claire's graduation photo used to sit before she packed it away. "I've got a daughter," she said eventually. "Claire. Lives up north." "Maybe you should call her Elena," said gently. Evelyn shook her head. "She's busy. She always is. She wouldn't come." But Elena wasn't convinced. That evening, she returned with Mateo, who gently but firmly said, "We're worried about you, Miss Evelyn. You need someone here. Someone who knows you, who can help." "I have you," Evelyn said. Mateo smiled sadly. "You do. But we're not your blood." Evelyn looked at them both, at Nico sitting cross-legged on the rug, trying to teach Missy how to shake paws. Her heart ached with love and fear and something unspoken. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was regret. "Fine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Call her." That night, Evelyn gave Elena Claire's number. The area code stung her heart. When Elena stepped out onto the porch to make the call, Evelyn stayed in her chair, gripping the arms like they might steady her spinning thoughts. She hadn't seen Claire in 18 months. The last time was awkward quiet. Claire had scrolled through her phone more than she'd looked at her mother. She'd only stayed for a day and a half. Evelyn told herself it was okay. That Claire had built a life. That independence meant success. That maybe she'd done her job too well as a mother. Now she wasn't so sure. From the porch, Evelyn heard the faint sound of Elena's voice, measured calm. Then silence. Then footsteps returning. "She said she's coming," Elena said. Evelyn stared. "She is. She'll be here tomorrow morning." Evelyn didn't respond. Her heart thudded in her chest, louder than the ticking clock, louder than the wind scratching at the windows. After Elena and Mateo left, Evelyn sat alone in the living room, Missy curled at her feet. She stared into the fire, watched it flicker, fade, then come alive again with a snap of kindling. Tomorrow, the door would open. Her daughter would walk in, and everything she had built in silence, every coping mechanism, every lonely routine, every excuse would no longer hold. She wasn't ready. But then again, she hadn't been ready for a sick boy to knock on her door either. And that had changed everything. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. She stayed in her armchair long after the fire had burned low, long after Missy had climbed onto her lap and purred herself into sleep. She sat with the weight of tomorrow pressing down on her chest, her hands gripping the arms of the chair as though she could brace herself against the clock. Her daughter was coming. The thought twisted in her stomach, not just from nerves, but from the knowing. Claire wasn't coming out of longing or regret. She was coming because Evelyn was sick. That was different. That wasn't love, it was obligation. Still, when dawn crept into the house, pale and gray through the frost-rimmed windows, Evelyn dressed herself carefully. She brushed her thinning hair, changed into a blouse that didn't hang too loose on her shoulders, even put on a pair of earrings she hadn't worn since Thomas's funeral. She had just finished setting a mug of tea down on the coffee table when she heard the car. Not just any car, a deep, steady purr, too smooth, too new. It rolled up in front of the house like it didn't belong on her street. Through the curtain, she saw it, a black SUV, with chrome trim spotless, despite the salted roads. The passenger door opened first. Claire stepped out. She was still tall and sharp-shouldered, her hair in a sleek bun, her coat perfectly tailored. Her boots were clean, her movements precise. A man stepped out after her, taller than Evelyn expected, with a square jaw, slicked-back hair, and the tired eyes of someone who measured time in phone calls and quarterly reports. Claire didn't look at the house. She was already scanning her phone. Evelyn stood frozen, one hand on the edge of the couch. Her stomach sank. Claire hadn't even hesitated. She was already marching toward the porch, like she was late for a meeting. The knock came brisk, businesslike. Evelyn opened the door. Claire's eyes flicked up from her phone. For half a second, there was something soft, surprise maybe, or concern, but it vanished. "Hi, Mom," Claire said. "You look tired." Evelyn gave a weak smile. "It's been a long week." Claire's husband offered a hand. "Martin," he said. "We came as soon as we heard." Evelyn shook it out of courtesy. "I didn't know you were coming too." Claire stepped inside, already looking around. "This place is exactly the same. It works." "I can tell," Claire said flatly, brushing past the old coat rack. "No heat, no updates, no internet." "God, Mom, you're practically camping out here." Evelyn ignored the jab. She led them into the living room where the fire had been rekindled, and Missy lay curled in her usual spot, indifferent to the drama. Claire sat stiffly on the edge of the couch. Martin stood awkwardly near the window. Evelyn eased into her chair and studied her daughter. She looked expensive, polished, but thinner than Evelyn remembered. Not in the body, though, there was that too, but in spirit. Like something essential had worn away. So Claire said finally, "What exactly is going on?" "Elena said you've been coughing for weeks." "Why didn't you call me?" Evelyn shrugged. "You're busy. That's not the point. You're my mother. You didn't act like it last Christmas." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Claire's jaw tightened. Martin shifted. "Maybe we should all take a breath." "We're fine." Claire snapped, not taking her eyes off Evelyn. Evelyn said nothing. Eventually, Martin excused himself to take a call outside. The moment he left, Claire's tone shifted. "Who are these people, Mom?" "The ones you gave my number to." "They're friends. Friends who bring you soup and watch your cat." "They brought more than that," Evelyn said quietly. "They brought warmth back into this house." Claire scoffed. "You barely know them." "I know kindness when I see it." Claire leaned back, crossing her arms. "I just find it interesting that you let strangers into your house, but you didn't think to call your own daughter. You only come when something's broken." Claire flinched, then looked away. Evelyn sighed, her voice gentler. "I'm not saying that to hurt you. I'm just tired, Claire. And lonely. And those people, they didn't ask for anything. They just showed up." Before Claire could respond, there was a knock on the door, softer this time. Evelyn opened it to find Nico and Elena on the porch. Nico held another drawing, beaming. "We brought Gus a treat," he said, holding out a little bag. Evelyn smiled. "You didn't have to." But behind her, Claire appeared. "This isn't a playground," she said sharply. "The dog doesn't need treats." Nico's smile vanished. Elena's expression stiffened. Evelyn opened her mouth, but her voice caught. Claire was already stepping between them, arms folded, blocking the doorway. "I think my mother needs rest," she said. Nico stepped back, eyes downcast. Elena nodded once, tight-lipped, and took his hand. "Sorry to bother you," she said. When the door closed, silence bloomed heavy in the room. Evelyn lowered herself back into her chair, trembling slightly. Claire stood at the window, arms crossed, gaze distant. "You let them in," she said quietly. "And now they think they belong here." Evelyn stared at her, eyes wide with something between heartbreak and disbelief. "They do," she said. "More than you think." Claire didn't answer. That night the fire burned lower than usual. No music, no laughter, no tamales on the counter or crayons scattered on the rug. And for the first time since the storm had passed, the house felt cold again. The cold lingered long after the fire died down. It wasn't just the draft from the windows or the frost creeping up the edges of the glass. It was something quieter, heavier. A stillness that pressed into the corners of the room and wrapped around Evelyn's chest like wet wool. The kind of cold that didn't come from outside, but from absence. The Ramirez family stopped coming. Not with soup. Not with drawings. Not even with a knock. The day after Claire turned them away, Evelyn sat in the living room waiting just in case they'd try again. Just in case Elena would appear on the porch, like she always did, arms full of warmth and comfort. But no one came. She made tea that went cold. She set out a second cup, and poured it anyway. Claire never noticed. She spent most of her time pacing the house on conference calls, with a Bluetooth headset, or making whispered criticisms under her breath about the lack of insulation, the smell of old books, the creepy quiet in the hall. Martin had returned to the city after one night. Work emergency, he said. Evelyn hadn't minded. He'd barely spoken to her anyway. But Claire stayed. And the longer she did, the more the house recoiled from her. She changed things, rearranged the kitchen, boxed up old knickknacks, tossed the stack of drawings Nico had made into the trash with a wrinkle of her nose. Evelyn didn't even realize until she opened the bin and saw the crushed yellow sun peeking out from beneath coffee grounds. She didn't say a word. What was there to say? One morning, Evelyn awoke to find the fireplace cold untouched. Claire had turned off the gas valve, saying it was a hazard. Instead, she had set up a portable electric heater from the trunk of her SUV. More efficient, she claimed. It whirred like a dentist's drill and warmed only the air within 6 inches of its face. Missy wouldn't go near it. The silence in the house deepened. Not peaceful, like before, but hollow. Dead. Evelyn grew weaker. Her cough returned deeper now, dragging from her chest like a chain. She moved slower. She forgot what day it was. She left dishes unwashed. Claire scolded her for not eating enough, but didn't cook. Just brought prepackaged salads and cold smoothies Evelyn couldn't stomach. Still, Evelyn stayed quiet. Even as her ribs ached from coughing. Even as her hands began to shake. Even when she started falling asleep in the chair without realizing it. She stayed quiet because part of her still hoped the warmth would return. That the Ramirez family would forgive the cold reception. That the door might open again, and Nico would barge in with a crumpled paper flower. But the door stayed closed. Until one afternoon, when there was a soft knock. Tentative. Not the quick, happy tap of a child, but the careful knock of someone who wasn't sure if they were still welcome. Evelyn's heart lurched. She tried to rise, but her legs gave way. She collapsed sideways near the fireplace. Her breath knocked from her lungs. From the kitchen, Claire's voice, "I'm on a call, hold on," Evelyn lay on the cold floor vision, swimming, her frail hands fumbling to push herself up. The knock came again, this time, followed by a familiar voice. Elena. Claire opened the door, arms crossed. Elena's face tightened the moment she saw Evelyn on the ground. "What happened?" she demanded, pushing past Claire. "She slipped," Claire said flatly. "She does that." Elena rushed to Evelyn, kneeling beside her. Evelyn's lips were pale. Her hands trembled in Elena's grip. "I'm taking her out of here," Elena said. "You can't just barge in." But Elena ignored her. As she helped Evelyn into the wheelchair by the door, another figure stepped inside Mateo. His eyes narrowed, fists clenched. "You should be ashamed," he said to Claire. Claire turned red. "This is my mother's house." "Then act like it." As they wheeled Evelyn out, Claire called after them. "You don't have the right. She's my family." But Evelyn didn't look back. That night she lay bundled beneath thick quilts on the Millers' living room sofa. Neighbors of the Ramirez family, who had taken them all in during the storm. Missy curled beside her feet. The warmth returned slowly, like light bleeding into a shuttered room. Lisa Miller sat beside her, checking her temperature with a mother's tenderness. John hovered nearby, phone in hand. "I'm calling your daughter," he said. Elena shook her head. She was there. She didn't care. "She'll care now," John muttered, "one way or another." The next morning, the black SUV returned. Claire stepped out, coat drawn tight, her face strained. Behind her, Martin emerged, confusion on his face. They crossed the street, knocked at the Miller's door. Lisa opened it, calm and cool. "Where's my mom?" Claire asked. "She's here," Lisa said, resting, Safely. You had no right to take her. Lisa didn't respond. She stepped aside. Inside, Evelyn slept quietly under the quilts. Claire took a step forward, but John blocked her path. She collapsed, he said. You left her on the floor. Claire's lips parted. That's not true. And then Emma stepped forward, Lisa's daughter, with Nico beside her, holding a small digital camera. You should see this, Emma said. Claire blinked. What is this, a game? But John pressed play. On screen, blurry but clear, appeared Claire's voice, sharp, cold, dismissive. Her words, the dog doesn't need treats. This isn't a playground. She does that now, rattled around the room like broken glass. There was footage of Evelyn alone, coughing, stumbling. Claire froze. Her expression cracked. You filmed me, she said. Emma didn't answer. Elena stepped forward. You called her a burden. Claire's eyes flickered toward her mother, who now stirred softly on the couch. For a long time, no one said a word. Then Claire whispered, I didn't mean it like that. But Evelyn had opened her eyes. Weak, but aware. You did, she said quietly. Claire's face twisted, guilt blooming fast and raw. Evelyn reached out not to Claire, but to Elena, who took her hand without hesitation. And in that moment, Claire realized kindness wasn't about biology. It was about showing up, about staying when things got hard. And she hadn't. Claire stood frozen, Evelyn's quiet words echoing in the still room. You did. It wasn't an accusation, it was a truth. Soft, but impossible to dismiss. And in that moment, Claire saw everything, the bruises of her absence, the hollowness she'd left behind, the way Elena now held her mother's hand like she'd always belonged there. I didn't. Claire tried, but her voice failed. She looked at Evelyn, really looked at her sunken cheeks, the bluish tinge under her eyes, the effort it took her just to stay upright. Shame washed over her like cold water. Martin shifted behind her, but didn't speak. He had the look of a man who knew there was nothing to say that wouldn't make it worse. Then, Evelyn did something Claire hadn't expected. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply turned her face away. Claire felt it more deeply than any harsh word. I think it's time you left, Lisa said gently but firmly. Claire blinked. You can't. She's my mother. And you left her on the floor like she was furniture, John said, stepping forward. We're done here. Martin touched Claire's elbow. Let's go. But Claire didn't move. Her feet felt nailed to the hardwood. She watched as Mateo fluffed Evelyn's pillow, as Elena tucked the quilt around her legs. Watched as Missy jumped up onto Evelyn's lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. It wasn't just that she was no longer needed. It was that she hadn't even been missed. Eventually, she turned and walked out, her footsteps hollow and sharp. Martin followed. They didn't come back. In the quiet that followed, Evelyn leaned her head back against the cushions. She was pale, her breathing shallow, but her voice when she spoke was steady. She'll come around, she murmured. Elena didn't answer, just squeezed her hand. Over the next few days, something unexpected happened. Evelyn started to get better. Not miraculously, not all at once, but her cough eased, her color returned, and her appetite stirred back to life. She asked for toast one morning, and then for a cup of Elena's broth that afternoon. She even sat up on her own, wincing a little, but grinning through it. I'm tougher than I look, she said. You're terrifying, John joked, handing her a cup of warm tea. The Ramirez family stayed close. So did the Millers. Meals arrived without anyone asking. Ben and Emma played quietly on the rug. Mateo brought in firewood without a word. Evelyn began to knit again, her fingers stiff but determined. One morning she asked for her own clothes. No offense, she told Lisa, but I don't feel like dying in borrowed socks. Who said anything about dying? Lisa shot back, helping her into a warm cardigan. By the end of the week, Evelyn was walking again slowly, with help, but on her own feet. She made it to the front porch with Elena's arm around her, and sat in the morning sun, wrapped in a shawl. The air smelled like melting snow and pine needles. She looked out across the street at her house. Quiet, empty curtain drawn. "You could go back any time," Mateo said beside her. "I know," she said. But she didn't. Instead, she stayed. The house had become secondary. What mattered now was the company. The next day, Mateo returned from her place with a box of her old yarn and an envelope of photographs. She sifted through them slowly, her wedding day baby Claire in her arms, Thomas in his uniform. A life both far away and still right there under her fingertips. Later that afternoon, Evelyn asked to speak to Elena alone. They sat in the kitchen quiet, but not awkward. "You remind me of someone," Evelyn said. Elena tilted her head. "Who, myself?" Before everything went quiet. Elena smiled, her eyes damp. "That's a compliment. It's the biggest one I have left." They sat for a moment sipping tea until Evelyn reached into her sweater pocket and pulled out a small brass key. "The house is too big for me now. Too quiet when I'm alone." "But it wasn't quiet with you." Elena's smile faded into something stunned and soft. "Miss Evelyn, I want you to have it. For your family. For whoever needs a warm place when the cold comes. I couldn't." "You already have," Evelyn said, pushing the key into her palm. "It's just a house. But you made it home again." Tears brimmed in Elena's eyes, but she said nothing. Just nodded and held the key like something sacred. That night, Evelyn sat by the fire again, her fire, but not in her house. She looked around the room, kids giggling softly on the floor, Mateo reading something on his phone, Elena in the kitchen humming under her breath. It was not the life she thought she'd end up with. But it was better. Claire never called. Evelyn stopped waiting for her to. Instead, she pulled her yarn into her lap and began knitting something new. Something warm. Something big enough for more than one. A few days later, she stood steadier now and walked out onto the porch with Mateo carrying a folded quilt in her arms. "I started it years ago," she said. "Thought maybe it'd keep me company someday." She handed it to Elena. "But turns out it belongs to people who already did." They unfolded it together. It was rough around the edges, but beautiful, full of deep reds and soft creams, with uneven stitches and corners that didn't quite match. It didn't matter. It was real. And it was Evelyn's way of saying thank you. Elena didn't speak for a moment. Her fingers ran over the rough seams of the quilt, her eyes fixed on the colors Evelyn had chosen: deep reds, warm creams, flecks of gold. It wasn't perfect, but it radiated care. It had weight. Like all the quiet hours Evelyn had poured into it, were stitched into the fabric. "I don't know what to say," Elena finally whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Evelyn said, her voice soft but clear. "Just keep it close." The wind stirred around them on the porch, tugging gently at the hem of Evelyn's cardigan. Mateo came to the door, pausing when he saw the two women. His eyes landed on the quilt, then on Evelyn. "We're not good at accepting gifts," he said with a half smile. "You'd better learn," Evelyn replied. "There's more where that came from." That evening, they laid the quilt across the back of the living room couch. It looked like it had always belonged there. Mateo lit a fire. Elena reheated stew. The kids Ben and Emma played quietly in the hallway, their laughter trailing through the house like music. The rhythm of home had returned, but now Evelyn wasn't just drifting inside it. She was part of it, rooted again. She felt stronger each day. Not the kind of strength that came from youth or muscle, but something firmer, an internal steadiness. A calm. She started walking short distances on her own, helping slice vegetables in the kitchen, teaching Emma how to thread a needle. She read stories to Nico and let him fall asleep curled beside her, with Missy snoring at their feet. John offered to drive her anywhere she needed to go. Lisa started writing down her favorite soup recipes for Evelyn to edit. There was always someone nearby, not out of obligation, but choice. That was what made it different. Then one morning, Evelyn called David. Not Martin, not Claire. David, the boy next door from long ago. The man who had plowed her driveway when Thomas was in hospice, who had always waved from his porch, but never quite crossed back over until now. He picked up on the second ring. I heard everything he said quietly. John told me what happened. I'm not calling for an apology, Evelyn said. I'm not even calling for her. I know. I'm just calling to tell you that I'm okay. He exhaled. I'm glad, Evelyn. Really. Claire's going through things. But I know that doesn't excuse it. No, it doesn't, Evelyn said simply. They talked for a while about the neighborhood, the storm, the school down the road that had finally reopened. It wasn't emotional, but it was honest. And when they hung up, Evelyn didn't feel heavy. She felt done. Like that chapter had finally closed. A week later, Evelyn packed 2 small suitcases. One held clothes and medication. The other held photo albums, her knitting supplies, and the folded blue shawl Thomas had once given her. She was leaving her house not because she had to, but because it was time. She stood in the doorway one last time, her hand on the frame. The rooms behind her were clean and quiet. The stove had been turned off. The curtains were tied neatly. The home was ready to be passed on. Mateo was waiting in the driveway with the truck. Elena stood beside him, holding Nico's hand. Evelyn locked the door, then turned to them with the key in her palm. This house, keep it open, she said. For people like you. People who knock when they need light. Elena's throat worked silently as she reached for the key. We'll take care of it, she promised. Always. They drove off that morning, Evelyn seated comfortably in the front, her hands folded in her lap, the shawl across her shoulders. She didn't look back. In the city, Evelyn's new home was a small, sunlit apartment just outside of downtown. Mateo had helped find it. It was close to a park. There were trees outside the window. She kept the quilt draped over her reading chair, and Missy took immediately to the windowsill like she'd been born there. Elena visited often. So did John and Lisa. Ben and Emma sent drawings in the mail, which Evelyn pinned up above her desk like stained glass. The house she left behind didn't stay empty. Neighbors came to sit on the porch. Friends dropped off groceries for someone who might need them. When a family from the next town lost their home in a fire, they stayed there for 2 weeks. No rent, no questions. The stove worked just as it always had. And the warmth Evelyn had once feared lost now lived in every corner of that home. One chilly evening, months later, Evelyn sat wrapped in her shawl by the window. A letter from Emma lay on the table beside her. It said in looping child handwriting, Miss Evelyn, we're keeping your house warm. Gus says hi. She smiled and reached for her knitting needles, starting another row on a new blanket, this one for Emma. Outside, the wind began to pick up, and Evelyn didn't mind. Not anymore. The warmth stayed. Because now she knew it wasn't just fire or quilts or soup that kept a house from freezing. It was people. And she had them.